Welcome out to another episode of It's All Been Checked Before. This time I Borg. I Borg, you Borg, we all Borg for Star Trek. I Borg on this episode of It's All Been Checked Before. You know what? It's resistance is futile. Get on patreon.com/IBD more specifically, and support us. Support It's All Been Checked Before. Support It's All Been Done Radio Hour. Support the whole network. It's very easily done. Very, very easily done. And that's why resistance is futile. Just like on this episode of not me, not you, Borg, I Borg on It's All Been Checked.
Welcome out to another episode of It's All Been Trekked Before. Your regular hosts are here.
This is Steven.
And Keith.
Jimmy Jerome. We are here to talk the episode I Borg, considered one of the top 10 episodes of Next Gen, I believe, by a lot of people. What are your first impressions now that I've unduly influenced you by telling you this is supposed to be a really good episode?
Worst episode ever. It was, I was pretty happy about it most of the way through. Once I got there, I got to the point where I'm just thinking to myself, this is a good episode. And I was wondering, am I right? Am I just biased by some other things? If I pull back a bit and look at it, and I can think, okay, they're manipulating us here by doing this and that. But I mean, still, that notwithstanding, was still good. So yeah, my first impression, as it often is for the cold open, I had at the Borg reveal, Riker stands up, stiffens, waiting impatiently for the credits to roll. So.
I had more of a journey. I had a journey like Guinan and some of the people on the crew where I started out like, I don't care for this at all. I shouldn't say that. Actually, that's too strong. I was definitely in the what galaxy universe are we in that where because I was kind of supporting the let's kill all the Borg idea and everything. It was a very TOS response I was having, but then I went on the journey and I was kind of like, is this just going to be that I did actually write down? The Borgs are just like us, and we'll get more into that later. But clearly they're not. But it's definitely that kind of thing. But by the end, I did actually. I came around. I came around to the idea that this is kind of it's TOS and TNG and lots of sci-fi can get very talky, and we're talking about these high concepts and what does this mean and what's right and what's wrong. And sometimes it can get annoying. But I thought actually, I was like, they did actually a pretty good job of it. I still have some quibbles, but yeah, I ended up liking it overall. So liking it quite a bit. And I was like, well, it's a Borg episode, so people have to love. I'm sure people have to love it, but I ended up liking it a lot. We'll get into the whole thing as we do. That's what we do.
So yeah, you may have heard a few baby noises. That's my son Leo. If you're on Patreon, you have to see him, but he's gonna exit here. So anyway, 3-month-olds. Apparently wasn't pleased with the episode, but he wasn't here when I watched it, so he can't be judgmental. My first impression, I think I mentioned before that I watched this episode right before Star Trek Picard premiered. I guess it's been like 2 years now. Because I knew Hugh was coming back for Star Trek Picard, Jonathan Del Arco. Yeah. And so I wanted to refresh my memory of who Hugh was, even though I think I had seen this episode a long time ago. And I honestly was like, I don't know if I really even want to watch this because I just watched it like a year or two ago. Right. And I'm not somebody that rewatches episodes that frequently. Mm-hmm. But I got sucked into it. Yeah, there were a few things I have issues with, mostly for things they changed about the Borg continuity down the road because it's not consistent all the way through, I don't think. I mean, I guess you could argue it is, but it's kind of a stretch to say that it is. So those parts bothered me a little bit. I do think they made the issue a little simplistic, and there were definitely people who were like, I'm all the way on this side and I'm all the way on that side, which did not feel realistic to me. Uh-huh. But at the same time, the issue story they were telling is A, good sci-fi, B, good character development, and C, it was a moving story with evolution of the franchise. And I think trying to put myself back in the early 90s with just what we've watched so far, I see why this is way up there in the rankings, because it is better than most episodes of The Next Generation, even if it's not a perfect episode.
Yep, that's well said. I think I observed at the time there was sort of I would call it more of a continuum of opinions with the people being represented.
What does Q have to do with this?
Sigh.
The Q continuum
actually got me. again, it's hard not to see that they're probably calculatedly placing these people here along this line to demonstrate this and so on. But I thought it was still effective.
I'll start with the title. I didn't research this. I didn't take the next step with it, but the title card on the episode is I Borg, capital I Borg, but
with a comma.
No, the actual when it comes up on the screen, there's no comma.
Oh, you're right. IMDb doesn't list a comma either.
Because that's the way I wrote it. As I write in my notes, I wrote I comma Borg, and I'm like, oh, I robot, I this, I that, and then I'm like, hold up. So I scratched out my comma, and then I was like, oh, it's a Roman numeral one Borg. That's what it is, and that is kind of where they go with it. But a lot of the Wikipedia stuff puts the comma back in there.
So Memory Alpha does not have the comma, but Star Trek.com does have the comma, which are our two biggest sources. Wikipedia has the comma, IMDb does not.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So that was something I jumped right into. Like, actually, I didn't know right away that it meant one, but I'm like, is that what it means? Like,
are you? I mean, I thought you were just joking. I mean, you think it was seriously? I mean, that didn't even occur to me, but that's actually a pretty good idea.
Yeah, because I mean, the idea, it gets into the whole individuality and all that stuff. So it's like one and Borg, and we're all one. It could come both ways because the Borg are one, the collective, but within it there are ones, there are eyes or whatever. Which I don't know if the comma would change that, but it definitely, with a comma, I don't read it as one Borg. I read it as I. But also I is one, so it's.
Yeah, I'm just now realizing that you're probably supposed to read it as I, because that's another one they really got me just then. The whole idea of him saying yes, the climax of him saying I, it's like never occurred to me. Wow.
Yeah, I feel like it could have the double meaning you're suggesting. I think the comma is missing as a mistake in some sources that was later corrected, because I think it's very clearly meant to evoke iRobot. Yeah. And what it means. What does it mean to be a sentient robot? What does it mean to be a Borg with individuality? Right. And of course, iRobot has the comma. And just by the fact that like the more recent sources all include the comma, I think, I gotta think it was a mistake.
That makes a lot of sense too.
Somebody that was not familiar with Asimov, because not everybody involved in the production side, I'm sure, was sci-fi fans.
Or they spent I'm thinking of the next episode, but maybe they were so tight on budget by this point they couldn't afford a comma in the title card. So
I thought you were about to go with I thought you were about to steal mine when I was about to say the budget thing. They had to get sponsored by Apple.
No, I'm Googling while we're talking to see if there's an explanation about this comma. And there is n-academic.com. It's just basically says the episode's commonly referred to in list episode guides as I, Borg. The episode title card reads without the comma. So I'm not finding anything definitive of what the problem was. But so we start the episode, and there's like something cool happening on screen that, of course, would be added after the fact in special effects. But we get a 3-shot of Riker, Picard, and Troy, and they have various looks of awe and wonder on their faces as they're staring at the screen, which I thought was kind of fun. But we had to get lots of Borg shots before the opening credits to get everybody all psyched up and ready for it.
I thought
Riker's reaction.
I thought that set was a classic TOS look to it. It was just the rocks and all that stuff.
We get back from the credits. Picard, of course, is reluctant to helping the Borg. Of course. And Crusher wants to save it. And of course, Worf says to kill it. So there's like the back and forth. But
wait, can I do the quote?
Sure.
Kill it now.
I was like, oh man, we got dark. And then I was like, nope, I agree with Worf.
Yeah, I think Picard would have just wanted to leave them, but it seems to me like he had that idea of doing the virus before he voiced it, and that like he had to have had that idea before he even let them beam up. That was kind of the point, I think, of him letting them, in my opinion. But Crusher is the one that saved Picard. and removed all the implants from Locutus and had to deal with the emotional trauma because, she's the one that's breakfast with him every day or whatever. So she knows firsthand how bad this was for him more than any other member of the crew. So for her to be so completely like, we have to save it, felt disingenuous to me because as a doctor, sure, you're going to want to save, but you also need to take into account your friend's feelings of what he went through. And she shows no sign of that.
I wrote right then, crush her and her dang Hippocratic oath. I wrote the stronger word, but her dang Hippocratic oath. I was like, oh man. And
what's stronger than Hippocratic?
Well played. But I feel like every time she brings up like, well, we have to save this thing, it usually ends up poorly. She gets kidnapped by terrorists or quote unquote terrorists, or something bad happens. I guess in this instance, eventually, in all the instances, eventually it's not so bad, but it was just like, okay, this can't be good. Although, to be fair, the Borg never did show up to destroy the Enterprise. They did show up eventually. But still, right away, I'm like, this goes to your point, Keith, where it's like, oh, she's clearly way over here in this camp, and there's no gray. She's way over there.
Yeah, and see, that's what I think was unrealistic. I think we needed to see complexity from Beverly we were missing. And her attitude. I also noticed that really early in the description of the Borg, they refer to them as young adolescents. And I'm sure that was meant to play to the audience heartstrings of, these are just teenagers. These are kids. You can't kill the kids. Right. Even though Q did not come across as a child to me at all.
No.
I mean, I guess technically in attitude and bearing, the actor was well into his mid-20s, Jonathan Del Arco, who played Q. Best known for The Closer, Major Crimes, and Star Trek The Next Generation, playing Q-35.
He was, I don't know if he was in the final two, but he was one of the finalists to play Wesley Crusher.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
So, which I could see. But
his other Star Trek credits, he will be back in an episode of The Next Generation. We don't have to wait all the way to Star Trek Picard to see Hugh again. He is in a second episode. It does make me think if this episode had come earlier in the series, if we would have seen him more than once more, like he seems like a character that's got legs. The actor returns as a different character in Voyager for an episode. And then, of course, returns as Hugh again in 3 episodes of Star Trek Picard when we get to it in 2020.
Also, oddly enough, he and Jerry Ryan are friends.
They are, and she was a big supporter of him going back for Star Trek Picard when he wasn't sure if he should play the character again. Because she, spoiler, is also in Star Trek Picard. So the 2 Borg characters returned.
Thankfully, I've seen that season now, so.
That's, well, Keith, if you had it, we're still 10 or 15 years away from covering it, so maybe you'd forget.
Maybe. So
they beam the Borg to a cell, not the sick bay, which is their Beverly and Picard's compromise. I don't think we've seen them beam to a cell before. And I don't know, Beverly made it seem like he was super in need of major intervention, but then when they beam up, he seems fine.
Whenever we have an alien, even go back to TOS, but it's always like, well, I'm not sure I know how to treat them. But she seems like she knows exactly. I guess maybe this goes back to you saying, how she fixed Picard. Maybe that's why she picked up that during that. She picked up some Borgian medical knowledge fixing Picard, I guess. I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, Beverly's the medical expert on Borg for the Federation at this point.
Yeah.
The only one that's deborgified.
She's the eye. I will say, I said this before, I like how each Borg, it's interesting that they're a collective, but I like how each one actually looks just a little bit different.
Yeah.
I find that really cool.
Different.
Let's jump into fashion real quick.
Fashion.
Hugh's hologram eyepiece was so 1990s.
Yes. Yes, it was.
I liked that. And the other fashion note I have is Guinan's hairnet that matched her outfit.
Uh-huh.
It was nice.
I appreciated that too, yeah.
The scene with Troy and Picard, I thought was a wasted opportunity, where she's talking about you're the victim of violent assault, and he brushes her off with typical masculine, the toxic alpha masculinity. And I really felt, and if this had been in Star Trek Discovery, they would have spent the whole episode talking about his trauma and how he feels. And I know that's a part of the sign of the times and the different, but that's the alternate episode I want. I want to deal with Picard's trauma, which I do believe in like films and stuff, and in the new series, we get more into his trauma than we do right here. And I feel like right here, we should be getting into the trauma.
Does she say, or maybe I diagnosed this, does she say you've got PTSD?
She didn't say that.
No, she just said you were the victim of violent assault.
Okay, so.
Which is still pretty strong language.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Jimmy, I think I think that sometimes is a symptom of PTSD, or that's the way we deal with it, is like, well, I can handle it. I
don't know if okay. I see what you're saying. I was wondering if you were trying to make the point that maybe the term just didn't exist then, which I was wondering myself.
Oh, but I think it did.
I think it did. It may not have been as commonplace, but
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, I want to give them credit because, the PTSD came in the East in the 70s. I want to because of Vietnam. I want to give them credit. The fact that we actually have a Star Trek captain who is a survivor of violent assault is a step forward in mental health awareness, even as they don't actually address mental health awareness.
Just thinking back to what we were saying before about the characters sort of acting out of character by design, that aspect reminded me of like D&D style characterization, where it's like, I am this alignment. I have to say this thing to fill this slot of the alignment and act in this way to do, Troy here also felt a little heavy handed to me in the sense that she was like, essentially, are you sure you're okay? Hey, why don't I list off all the things that happened to you and see if I can trigger an episode or something? Like, come on, huh?
Yeah.
Huh? You did this. It's like, what?
Yeah, I think the real oath now.
The real purpose of that scene, I believe, was because, of course, in those days they couldn't count on people to watch every episode, so you had to catch everybody up on what happened.
Yeah,
that was their way of saying previously on Star Trek: The Next Generation. Picard talks of using it as a virus, and there's a whole bit there where he is not acting the hero. And again, I applaud Star Trek in the 90s for having the courage to show their captain not being a hero. But immediately Beverly starts talking about genocide and war crimes. And Picard's like, no. And I do think this does genuinely fall into a gray area that's not clearly genocide or war crimes.
Yeah.
But I see how you could argue that it is.
Certainly.
And there's just not the complexity of that discussion. It's way too, we want to wipe them out. She doesn't. That's it.
Yeah. That's where because I was like, that's a great plan. Let's do this.
Yeah.
Similarly to what Stephen was saying at the beginning, I did also go on this similar journey in the sense that right at the outset, it just feels like Beverly's being pretty unreasonable about just almost irrationally naive about a lot of things here. And I think that in some ways, it's a good sign for what they were trying to do, because I was right there along with that ride going, what are you talking about? Why would you do this? And then you keep kind of nudging along with the emotional poking, proddings and so on with Geordi. Which I think this ended up being more of a Geordi episode than I would have expected, which I really enjoyed, actually. I thought it was a great use for him.
I like that come around. Picard actually says the title here, at least the title I recognize. He says, "One Borg." So...
When they're talking about,
he said it.
When they're talking about the Borg and saying they need to feed it, Picard does in that scene refer to him once as a he. So I think there is that gradual arc. It's not a sudden switch flip. Picard and Guinan's fencing scene was wonderful. Even though, and see, here's the complexity I wanted to get into more. Guinan's people, and I don't know if we really know this at this point, but Guinan's people were massacred by the Borg. I think we do know this. And she's one of the handful of survivors. Most of her race is dead because of the Borg. So her being so against it makes total sense to me. And the whole thing where she feigned the injury to make a point to Picard, I enjoyed that. And even though, they gave her more complexity than most of the characters in dealing with the situation. She came around a little quicker than I would have preferred, but yes. I do think that scene was still powerful. Like it really, she had the right to be angry and hateful.
I summed that up with touche, Guinan.
I thought, in my mind, just the whole thing is like, and again, I don't know the Borg as well as you guys, or I don't even know Borg as well as you guys. But
do you know one Borg?
The previous episodes, it was like, and we talked a little bit about that, which is like, man, these guys are, resistance is futile. They're going to assimilate you, all this, and like, they don't care about us, and blah blah blah. And so it's like, okay, well, how do we get rid of these? How do we take care of these guys? The Starfleet was already way behind the curve, and we know the Borg they're gonna continue to learn and stuff. So in my mind, and I guess I'm cutting to the end a little bit, but not entirely, I don't think the Borg are just like us, and I think Hugh, third of five, I think he was alone. He was cut off from the collective, but I don't think he was an individual until he hung out there. And I don't know if that kind of finding your selfness or whatever that way, I don't know if that's ideal, because he was just doing that to survive. And I don't, I know he looked at Geordi at the end like, see you, buddy. But I don't think that's going to remain. And I also think we still don't know that they learned. So he was learning like, all right, what I need to do to get by here. And then as soon as I'm gone, we're going to crush them. And I'm going to remember everything I learned here. So
I mean,
whether that was his purpose or not, you will find out, because he does come back.
Exactly.
So is that your actual theory right now? Or were you just considering, or were you just being cynical throughout the episode, thinking that it was...
When I watched the end, I'm like, okay, they're just like us, kind of a thing, which I know that's where they were going. But then I was like, no.
The Borg are not a species. I mean, they are. But Beverly saying, this is a species, we're committing genocide. The Borg drones we've seen are mostly human or other recognizable aliens. Right. Because what they've done is they've enslaved and brainwashed these people. And so this isn't like... I mean, Klingons don't I guess Klingons do to a certain extent enslave and brainwash the Soviet species underneath them that we don't really see. But you know what I mean? Like, the Borg aren't the same thing. It's not like, let's kill all Klingons. It's not the same thing.
Right. And the Earth used to do that, but they got past enslaving. That's something we did. Can we just get past that?
It would be more analogous to destroying a very large cult or an army.
Yes.
Yeah. Then that's the way I looked at it. One that was going to destroy us. Yes. And not just humans, Klingons, the entire galaxy. I think this fits here. I did write down, Crusher says, I don't see collective consciousness, a collective mind. So Crusher is one of those people that also doesn't see color, is essentially what she's saying there.
Yeah.
I was like, are you kidding me, Beverly? So she also says, I think actually at that point, here Crusher or Picard says Errand of Mercy, which also a great episode of Star Trek.
That could have been the alternate title of this episode. I liked the set designs in this episode. The cell block was really cool. What we saw of it, where they were holding Hugh at first. Uh-huh. And then we went back to the Lal chamber that has the original series bridge railing around it.
The what chamber?
Where Data built Lal. That's where they were holding Hugh later. Yeah. And what always strikes you about that chamber is if you look, the little railings around the middle pedestal are clearly the original series bridge railings just painted.
Just generally speaking, why are we messing with the Borg? We don't need this.
They stumbled on it, though. I mean,
right, but yeah, just drop them off at the next starbase and get on with the mission.
Yeah, I would think Starfleet would demand you hand them over so they can study them.
And that was what I was thinking. Like, as many times as we check in with the Commodore, there was what you're going to tell them after the fact?
Yeah,
the heads will roll. So now I sound like One Earth now. I sound like I'm running a news network for right wing.
Earth.
That's Picard's hubris coming through again.
Yeah.
One of my favorite quotes from Picard season 1, and this won't spoil anything, and I'm going to have to beat myself because this is the one time I heard it. Well, Discovery's dropped an F-bomb, but in Star Trek Picard season 1, an Admiral goes, Jean-Luc, you and your fucking hubris. Because he does. He's got hubris out the ass.
Yep.
I think a lot of that is justified by the end when they're making it clear that the Borg would keep tracking him anyway. I mean, wherever you would take Hugh would endanger that location, so they probably couldn't just, here you go, guys.
Starfleet has to have, but they were able to block the signals, so they couldn't track you, right? Because they were blocking the signals, so you couldn't communicate with the collective.
I guess.
So they could have taken Hugh and not been followed. The Borg were coming to the crash site. The Borg weren't coming to Hugh.
That's why, Keith, I'd have beat him down to a lifeless moon. And then left.
And then that moon would have got knocked out of orbit, and then his wife would have died, and then 20 years later, that we would have got the wrath of Hugh.
Or, a lifeless moon somewhere closer to the Romulan side of the neutral zone. That's where I would have left it.
Romulans play a big part in Star Trek Picard as well with the Borg. So
there you go.
Geordi, the whole subplot with Geordi is great. The being charmed by him and naming him, but by halfway through the episode, without real justification to do so, he's not in a cage anymore. He's just like walking around the lab, interacting with Geordi and Crusher, and I'm like, okay.
It's the long game, like Steven was saying. He's just waiting for his moment, and he's just so convincing.
I liked the Geordi Guinan scene too, even though Guinan had no sympathy for Geordi, and she's like, he's not a lost child. But then Geordi flipping it back on her and being like, well, your species is known for listening. Why don't you go in there and do what you do best? Which is a little bit racist or speciesist, but also it was a good cover. It was a good back and forth.
He didn't say anything about her species. He just said that she is good at listening. That's what she's like. No,
she said your people are known for listening. The Elorians are called the race of listeners. That's what her species.
What?
I thought he meant she was a bartender.
Yeah, I don't remember him saying anything about like.
He said your people.
Huh.
Yeah, no, her species is considered a race of listeners. But the bartender, that's why she makes such a good bartender.
She's a bartender, yeah. I also thought this was the first time this dawned on me. I mean, we always like the Guinan appearance, the Whoopi Guinan appearances. She's the one person, because everyone talks like Patrick Stewart obviously talks in a different thing, and Riker's very serious, and everyone talks about nanobites and all that kind of stuff. She's the one person in this universe that talks like a regular person. No matter what, she talks like a regular person. Obviously, Guinan always has good things to say, but I think it's also the way she says them, and that she says it in like, I'm speaking plain English. You can talk in your haughty way, but
she's the only character that could transfer to the Orville and be completely at ease.
Yes. Yep.
And she feels natural in this episode, unlike Imaginary Child, which she felt shoved in that we just watched, which was interesting because I found out after we recorded that episode that she had become available the night before filming, and they hastily wrote a scene for her and put her in that episode.
Oh, that makes sense.
That's why she felt,
Oh, we were talking about Geordi and naming a hero or whatever, which is just a way of normalizing the Borg. Let's call it what it is. It's normalizing the Borg. But on the other part of it is like, he has a name. He's third of five, right?
Mm-hmm. That's a designation. That's not a name.
It's like a serial number or something.
And I guess you could say there's a lot of Jims or a lot of Bobs or a lot of whatever out there, but there's a lot of groups of five Borg, and there's a lot of third of fives. I was
going to say. Now, the other thing, and this is something I needed to point out, does he ever change his name to 3? Or is it misremembering because of 7 of 9? Because
he does not go by 3. He goes by Hugh, which that was a little hokey. That Hugh, you're Hugh now, not you, Hugh.
And it occurred to me that this probably has something like the I too, the you and I, Borg, you. Does his name ever start being referred to as anything else? Because I feel like we've been, every time we've mentioned before, we've been saying 3 of 5, or at least that's what. In
this episode, they call him 3 of 5 until they call him Hugh.
No, third.
After this episode, they only ever call him Hugh.
No, my point is they're saying 3rd in this episode, but I have been hearing it as 3 of 5 for a long time, I think, in my head.
Interesting.
Which is why I was so surprised. Like 3rd.
Well, because of 7 of 9. Gotcha.
Exactly. So I don't know.
And, he's 35, call him 35, but I guess he likes you, so that's why.
He does like you. Yeah. I'm saying I enjoyed a lot of scenes, but I enjoyed the scene with Guinan and Hugh where she teaches him resistance is not futile and then speaks of her home, and he teaches her that they're both lonely. Like, what a great exchange. Yeah. While I am, like I said, I do think Guinan flips a little quickly. I do appreciate where she was like, I didn't want to see him and I just ended up there. And I can appreciate all that part of it, where she wanted to stay away from him, but she couldn't.
it's ironic that she's lonely because the Borgs killed all of her people. So it's not exactly analogous.
Yeah, but see, Hugh, I'm sure all of his friends and family were killed by the Borg too. The real person that was assimilated.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a very good point.
What's different here, and this is in your point of like Locutus as Picard or 7 of 9, 7 in Voyager, is in those cases, in Picard's case as Locutus and 7 of 9's case, we get to know the human underneath the Borg because like Picard gets back to being Picard, or 7 gets to be an individual outside the collective. Hugh is still very much a Borg, even when he gets his individuality. And that's a different take than what we see with other Borg stories. And they leave the implants in. They don't try to find his actual personality underneath. I thought that was an interesting choice.
And I can't remember if he says or somebody else that he's not a person, he's a Borg.
Uh-huh.
And then is it he might be the one who says he's going to I think they talk about whether it's possible to unattach from the Borg, which I thought was interesting too. So
well, we know it's possible because Picard did it.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Did they ever make it clear to what extent a personality would come back? I can't remember.
That's 7 of 9. That's the 7 of 9 story.
True. Because I'm wondering.
We'll get that story in Voyager.
Yeah. No, for the purpose of this episode, though, theoretically, how much of the human are we seeing at all? I mean, is he just like a blank slate that was completely wiped out, and they're kind of reprogramming him?
That's the way they treat it, which is a little confusing because other Borg we see later get treated differently. But I think part of it is they just separated him. They didn't try to restore him in any way. They just cut off his communication.
Which is interesting in itself, too, because go ahead. Oh,
no, sorry. I just, maybe this is where you're going, and because I have several notes on this, but they're all essentially the same note, which is, they do a lot with Star Trek and TOS. It was like they're beating down this like individuality, how important it is. But at the same time, this is the universe that gave us the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And so I think it's... And maybe
so you're saying the Borg are right?
Yeah, well... Maybe,
are you a Thanos' right person too?
Maybe.
Then the Borg make everybody's life better. They eliminate war and poverty, so we should all just be Borg.
I gave that speech the other day, actually. They're like, you know what? Thanos is on to something. But I think it's weird because, I think there's an argument, whether it's our military or Starfleet, that there's a sameness there too. Like we get to know these characters in a way, but on the other hand, Starfleet really wants them to be this person, and that they want to be part of the whole. And part of the thing we learn about like basic trainings to break down the person and make them a killer and that kind of stuff. But there's also the idea of a society and a common good, and we're all working towards this common goal, which God knows we'd love to have that in our current world. With where they mean to get with this is more of a free will and getting to make your own decisions about your own life and that kind of thing. Which who among us has free will? I know we've talked about that before too. But so I think that's where they're trying to go. But the way the language is and the way it's said sounds more like, well, we got to let him be an individual broken off from the tribe. And it's like, you don't want anyone on your ship to do that. You want everyone on board with what we're doing. We're on this mission. Everyone's got to be together. So maybe that's their roundabout way of saying the Borg are like us. We're all on a mission. We're doing this together. And it also gets to that, again, I'll point out Requiem from Methuselah, an episode I do not care for, but Kirk spends 45 minutes saying, like, she has to be an individual. She has to be allowed to make her own decision, which really what he's saying is she needs to be allowed to decide she wants to have sex with me. But which he confuses with love. But anyway, so that's most of the rest of my notes. But maybe it's a conflict's not the word, a tension there between those, like, how much do you go one way or the other? We want this common good, but we don't want to necessarily beat that individuality out of people. So maybe that's the tension they were actually going for.
So you bring up an interesting point because they talk about individuality here, and they say in the Borg nobody has individuality; it's all a collective. But we know that not to be true even now because they let Locutus have an individual personality and serve as a spokesmouth. And have they called them Borg drones yet? Has that term been used?
I don't think so.
Because
I don't know.
When we talk about the Borg, we usually talk about the drones. But what we'll find is they have a queen, which of course they do. Because when there's drones, there's a queen. And so the existence of the queen negates the argument that it's only a collective, that everybody's operating, because somebody's got to be driving their purpose. And Picard's existence as Locutus, even if the queen was never introduced, tells us right there that there are exceptions. So the collective is sold to the Borg as a whole to be like, hey, nobody's better than any other, well, except the queen, but forget her. Right. Or except Locutus right now, but forget the rest. We're all the same.
Yeah.
It's kind of like in this country where everybody has the same opportunity and chance to succeed. Don't pay any attention to the rich people rewriting the rules for themselves. Everybody's on level playing field. And systematic oppression and racism and generational racism does not exist. That's gone. Don't teach about it in history class.
Says we're all created equal. Why can't we just go with that?
Yeah, why do we even have to talk about race? You're being racist just bringing it up.
I know.
Obviously, I'm being facetious because...
Me too.
But that same parallel is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
I mean, there's still the argument that Locutus was sort of like a tool for a purpose.
Yes.
Specifically to be a mouthpiece, like literally Locutus mouthpiece.
Yeah.
And we'll see different drones have different attachments for different purposes. So the Borg definitely have specialized equipment, and Locutus, locution, the mouthpiece. Yes. Yeah, but, that's just another.
Well, I think there's really an important semantical thing there. I mean, is it really individuality in the sense that Star Trek humans usually mean it when they say it? And
I mean, he wasn't called one of one. He was called Locutus.
But that's still, all right.
Eye of eye.
That's more like having like flair at your desk or something, as opposed to having, But I thought
you're better than the rest of these drones, Locutus, because we gave you a name. We won't give you a raise or anything, but you have a name and additional responsibility.
Right. But Geordi, when he said, I'm an individual because I can do whatever I want or something along those lines, which isn't exactly true, which is what I think you're touching on. He's on a military ship.
Yeah.
It's not like he can just...
He has regulations and rules, but he could quit that military and go do whatever he wants, whereas Hugh is not given the option to quit the Borg collective.
Mm.
Fair.
The paradoxical shape that will destroy the Borg. Is that like Kirk tricking the computer into a paradox?
That's what I thought was going on there too. Yeah.
Oh, that was funny. Yeah.
What bothered me about that scene is Geordi is expressing his doubt about we should use Hugh for this, and Picard's like, well, on Earth we used to do animals and people would get attached, and you should just get over that. And I'm like, whoa, wait, so you're telling me animal cruelty is fine? Is that what Picard's saying? Picard is saying those scientists were wrong to have feelings for the animals, and we should have just kept using them in testing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think they didn't realize the argument they were making with that comparison.
There are some disturbing, as we've touched on, arguments going on.
The irony of Picard offering Guinan a drink was fun, because how many drinks does she give him? I'm sure. I liked the whole way she approached that second conversation, where she's asking Picard to persuade her not to act. Instead, that I enjoyed all that, and then Picard losing his temper. I mean, that we're gonna get. Like I said, we've got a Borg movie coming up with Picard. It's the best of the next gen movies, and that's where we'll really get into the lasting trauma and the line must be drawn here type stuff.
I like the idea at the end. They're like, well, maybe he can infect him with his selfdom, but I have a feeling that's not going to happen. That's just a hunch based on what I know about future movies.
I honestly don't remember. It feels like there's something to it, but I don't remember.
I remember
exactly
what it is, but I'm not going to elaborate. I'll let you find out.
That's cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. Because the other next gen episode with Hugh will deal with what you're wondering about, I believe.
Cool. And
Picard has the Borg
coming back, so that was
so when Picard wants to talk to Hugh, he doesn't go down to the lab. He has him beamed to his ready room. Why? Was that set not available that day?
Right.
More
and especially like not having a guard at all. It seemed dumb.
Yes, I agree.
No, Hugh was that convincing. He said, I have a name. We are Hugh. I'm not going to hurt you. So I'm on board.
How can he hurt you?
It was a little bit scary when Picard slips back into that Locutus persona and orders Hugh to assimilate the Enterprise. Like scary in a good way, like good television, good drama.
Yeah.
And Hugh resisting Locutus. disobeying, referring him just to I, and protecting his friend Geordi. I do think it's a little interesting that like Beverly's there too. Is she chopped liver? You only care about Geordi and the rest. You never care about Geordi and Beverly and whoever else. Do you think Data's a little bit jealous that Geordi's now hanging out with a different mechanical man?
Should he be capable of that? I mean, I guess it depends on the week of the episode, but
yeah,
that's a good point, Keith. He's probably just not capable.
So not supposed to be anyway. Hugh is just that calculating and that good. He's like, I know this is a test. I'm just gonna.
That's still my theory.
Bring it on, Picard. No, I know what you're doing.
That's what I thought. I thought he was like, "Who's zooming who, buddy? I got you."
So my next note is about the individuality argument, Stephen, you're making of like, does that individuality affect the assimilated Borg when he goes back? Not to tell you what's coming up, but my thinking in that moment is, but they all have individual personalities before they're assimilated. So how is sending back a drone with a personality that they can then wipe out going to infect when the individual personality is pre-assimilation?
Right.
I think the idea is that they would be wiped out before they're actually hooked into the collective. They're actually being initialized and then plugged in. If they just plug a piece right back in unsuspecting, there would be a brief moment, as he was saying, where that information is being circulated.
They should have
something.
I guess this is my other alternative episode. They should have planted through some kind of brainwashing, something in his brain that would activate it when somebody said something. It would activate the sleeper cell, and he would just destroy everybody at that point.
Pineapple.
Yeah, exactly. Gee, that Italian family over there is so nice and well behaved. Family Guy reference.
Yes. They also upload Kung Fu into him, so it's just so that trigger happened. And she's just
the TV show, right?
Yes, so he'd have something to watch when he was back in his recharging cell. And Geordi's just a Kung Fu fan. What can you say?
He internalizes all the lessons, and he starts teaching them from.
Picard offers Hugh asylum, but he chooses not to stay because he wants to protect Geordi. I don't know. That felt a little strange.
I don't think it was that simple. I think he brought up Geordi as an example to humanize what was happening more. Mm-hmm. Certainly made it more touching for our benefit, but he did seem to be using yes, I wanted to say that earlier when you mentioned it. That's what I was thinking of. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. He was using that logic, essentially. He said something very similar, but not quite, I think.
Yeah.
Do you guys think it's... And I had this thought, too, because I was thinking, like, well, if he was like, oh, I don't want to leave Beverly, would that make it different? Or the fact that he was so... Because for a while, I'm like, oh, yeah, Geordi's his best friend. And I was like, wait a minute. Is he in love with Geordi if we're going to extrapolate this out? And I mean,
he might be.
That's fine, too. The way he talked about him like he was in love.
Well,
yeah, I think they were trying to play him with a childlike personality so he wouldn't get into the romance of it all or anything. But, Jonathan Del Arco, the actor, is a gay rights activist. So that would make sense. He's married to a man. So that would make sense if they went that way with him. They don't, but that would have been an interesting way to go, I think. And despite my issues, the ending of this episode was very touching. Hugh not wanting to forget himself. And then when Geordi beams down with him and he watches the Borg collect their dead, I thought it was very interesting. They took the time to show the Borg collecting their dead, and it was moving, and it did give you a little bit of pause of there is something here besides just mindless drones. I mean, you could argue that they're just not wasting resources, but when they collect their dead, it feels personal.
That was my assumption.
Yeah, that would be the reason given. But I don't know, the way they did it, I guess the way Robert Letterman directed it, he was one of the regular Trek directors we've had. This was written by Renee Echevarria, who's one of the regular top writers. So it was given to some of their people, and I got to think that was a very purposeful ending, and I appreciated it. Rather than just beaming and ending at that moment of I don't want to lose myself, that seeing him collect the dead was something.
Yeah, I did like it.
I just want to go back to the Hugh and Geordi thing. I think it made sense for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, he would have been more likely to imprint on Geordi being around him the most when he's awake, or when he became awake and
Mhm.
or woke up, whatever, and was being fed and essentially handled and trained by Geordi to respond in certain ways, and doing most of the studies. So
Yeah.
there's some of that, and also that process is another manipulation for our benefit. Geordi being the one who was more reluctant than Beverly, or at least he was reasonably neutral and didn't really see much of a problem with what was going on until he started to befriend Hugh. So they wanted to really just drive that one into our chest, that nail. Like, oh, look at that. This is just, isn't this heart-wrenching?
Mhm.
Yeah.
At some point, I can't remember if Crusher says it or somebody says it to her, essentially like she doesn't know how to handle, she's a peacetime. Essentially, they say the Godfather line that, Crusher isn't a wartime consigliere. So like, this is not your speed. You should just, take care of the sick. And not as a condescending way as I just said it. They say it in a different way. Somebody, and I can't remember, this might be Crusher or Geordi, says Hugh's spatial acuity percentiles are off the charts or whatever. And I was just like, spatial acuity percentiles? What is it? What is this? Advanced analytics? What is this? Some kind of new sports term? But
I'm just surprised they didn't make him take the test rate to memorize man, person, woman, TV, or whatever. I'm sure he would have done really well on that test.
I mean, spatial acuity, essentially they're saying he has great hand-eye coordination. Isn't that what they're saying?
I thought it meant he could envision shapes because, what we were talking
spatial
about.
Anyway.
Okay, like that.
Like that very complicated shape. Which one is it turned inside out? I didn't know, but he did.
Oh, right. That is what.
Yeah.
Well, he got an 800 just for signing his name. Third at 5.
But, but if he signed it Hugh, he would have failed that portion of the test.
They got him.
My last note is, and I mentioned the Borg. I've liked their look and sound. And I think they changed a little bit for this one, both the look and the sound. And I like that his sound. I've mocked the TOS sound so many times whenever there's a godlike person that's God the Echo and all that nonsense. But so his slight echo, I thought, but slight tinny echo was really good. And I guess I read several times. I read after the show last night that kind of was based on Edward Scissorhands. I was like, that makes total sense that they were kind of looking at that. It makes total sense.
Yeah.
Jonathan Delarco also was kind of looking at Edward Scissorhands because he's this guy he's the last one of his kind and all that stuff. So I thought that was interesting.
I thought Jonathan Del Arco was really good in this episode.
I did too.
Honestly.
I think it could have gone a different way with a lesser actor or lesser performance.
Yeah.
It could have been really mawkish and just like, I don't care.
Yeah, I mean he starred in Major Crimes and The Closer in the last decade, but he doesn't have a huge list IMDb roster, but and I know he's very politically involved. He worked for the Warnock and Ossoff campaigns, and he worked for Obama and Clinton. But I just think he could probably have more of an acting career if he, I don't know, or maybe he deserves a little more of an acting career.
Yeah, even already knew what I was about to say there. But,
what were you about to say?
Would you say then that there is only a certain amount of credits that?
I purposely did not say that.
I know that the Picard actually referenced things that happened in past episodes about them, going on the incursions into the Borg cubes and so forth. But it still felt a little risky to me to assume that they were not going to acknowledge Geordi if you went down there with them, especially for the purpose of something sentimental as opposed to something that was like mission critical. Like they had to take that risk. They had, but I mean, in the past episodes, they were doing something with, it was necessary for them to roll a dice on that one, but this
I agree with you. Alternate episode, Stephen.
When Worf says let's kill it, they kill him, and then
ending credits. Da, 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 da.
No, they kill him, and then they all individually have to deal with the consequences of, man, this is not something we regularly do. I mean, in a sense, they do regularly kill other people all the time, but that's a more very personal, like, did we do the right thing? It was whatever. It was a teenage Borg or whatever you want to say. So that was because just the way Worf said it, even as a Klingon, and maybe that speaks to how, I'm going to say this terrible term, humanized he's become over these 5 seasons. But I I thought, but yeah, I that was the one I wanted to see, was them dealing with the consequences of, did we do the right thing, and where they might have ended up after that. So that was my alternate episode.
Well, you made me think of another one then, and that is, his kill it now, hide the evidence. We don't want them to know we were here. And so then what? Instead,
Borg detectives.
Yes, Borg. Yeah, you beat me. So they're trying not to turn on each other. Who's going to crack? And
well, they have, we've talked about, they have different drones for different purposes. Yeah. They have a Borg detective.
Yep. The Columbo trench coat, and he's coming on. And he's
assimilated the complete works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
I have just one more question for you guys.
The Borgs are like the Masterpiece Society. They've got drones that do certain roles, and they're okay with that.
Yeah.
They uploaded Kung Fu and Columbo and Murder, She Wrote.
So since they say multiple times Hugh is an adolescent, should we rank him as an annoying kid? Because he didn't seem like a kid to me.
He was almost, the actor was going to be Wesley Crusher. Well, he had a shot at being Wesley Crusher.
I'd give him a 0 on the annoyance scale. I'm just asking.
Yeah, he wasn't annoying. I mean, he was a Borg. But he wasn't annoying.
Okay, I'm going to put him as in the kid slot, but I'm giving him a 0.
All right.
Who was your annoyance this episode?
I feel like it's going to be the same as Jimmy's. I'm going to go with the Beverly Crusher.
Yeah, me too.
It was too hard. Just no, there's no possibility for anything else. You're murderers. You're committing genocide.
Without understanding the complexity of the situation, both on the species level and on the personal level of her closest friend. Yeah, I'm right there with you. Who are we going to have a drink with?
I'll call him by his original name, Third of Five. That's who I'm going to have a drink with. And
I'm having a drink with you. I disagree.
Borgs can get drunk. Well, I should backtrack because I already said this. If he wants to be called Hugh, I will call him Hugh. So, yeah.
I disagree with both of you. I'm going to have a drink with 3 of 5. Thank you.
Oh, and for the purposes of this podcast, I am going to list this episode with the comma because that seems like that's what Star Trek's going with now, and it will bother the heck out of me if I don't. So I'm adding the comma.
I am not recognizing that as canon, but I respect you're keeping the record. So
ranking the episode, Ensign Ro, better or worse? Another guest character that we actually get into the head of and has a complicated relationship.
God, that's tough. It's like
I'm going above. I love Ensign Ro. The episode and the character, I'm going above.
See, this is probably the first time I've gotten to say this in a while, but I feel like this might be recency bias on my part, but it is pulling me above because I can barely remember anything about that Ro episode except maybe a couple of jackets or something. And
the jackets were the first thing that came to my mind. You're not alone.
Just like, I don't know.
And how the badge mysteriously got onto her undershirt as she took off the jacket.
It phased. It was out of phase with it. Well, it's going to be
next week. Spoiler: that episode won't be this high.
Just like Steven was out of phase earlier with the recording.
I did phase that. I will say, well, Keith Bowles, I'm positive I enjoyed the Ensign Ro episode more, but this is probably, and again, we get into that, it's the Borg, and it's a very important episode. A lot of weighty concepts are talked about. Like, we discuss a lot of stuff that's discussed in this episode. Even things I disagree with them if I was from a perspective of being in the episode, but as far as watching it, I thought it was very good. I'll save you the acrimony, Keith. I'm gonna go above you.
You already convinced me with that, I think.
Okay.
Right there. So right. Yeah.
Above Ensign Ro is Redemption 2.
The difficulty.
I think Redemption 2 is more important to the Next Generation's arc. I think Borg is more important to the franchise as a whole. I'm going to still go above.
Really?
Yeah.
I was going to say the difficulty I'm having with this, and especially, the Ensign Ro episode as well, is that there just seem to be a lot more going on in the other ones. Action-wise and sets and locations, and just the scope of it seemed bigger, even though conceptually there's a big scope in what was happening there. You just don't see it on screen necessarily for Borg.
For me, this is up there with Measure of a Man, which was our favorite episode of season 2, with Data's argument for personality. An imperfect episode because they simplified some things, which makes sense for TV, the era. But what they were trying to do with this episode feels really important and high quality to me, like Measure of a Man. I mean, spoiler, I would put this number 1 for the season. We still have 2 episodes above Redemption, but I would put this all the way up to number 1 for the season.
I thought Redemption was the top. What's above that?
Unification 1 and 2, the Spock episodes.
Ooh.
Yeah. Well, Unification 1 was more of a Sarek episode, and Unification 2 was more of a Spock episode, but you know what I mean.
Oh, that is tough.
I would go below, just so you can make the decision, Keith.
Below which?
Below
All of them.
Redemption Part 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you'd put it 4th for the season.
Yeah.
I'm putting it 1st. Keith, you can side with one of us or pick something in the middle.
Man.
Yeah, essentially, if you go with Jimmy, then you guys decide where it lands, because I'm out at that point.
No, I mean, honestly,
Probably.
if he goes, but he could say, I want it 2nd place or 3rd place, and I think wherever Keith decides is where it ends up, because we know where we are,
right. Yeah.
and he's got some wiggle room. It's not this or this now. It's this, this, or this.
You're right.
So it's even worse on Keith.
Yeah.
I don't feel qualified to make that decision right now because, as I said, I don't remember the details of the other ones at the moment. I feel like
and yet you have to.
I think by definition it should go somewhere between, so at least above Redemption at this point. If you two are
above Redemption 2, okay. Yeah. So the above Redemption 2 is Unification 2, the Spock episode.
So the one where Spock actually showed up.
Yep.
I'm below those at the moment. It's okay. It's hard for me to.
So we're gonna put Borg in 3rd place. That's fair. Those are good episodes. I'm not too disappointed. Unification 1 and 2.
I thought one Borg might end up number 1, but Jimmy would have made it number 1. But it ends up I.
Oh God! It ends up, no, it's even it ends up being 3rd.
I. Borg's on a cube. Next week, the next phase, a transporter malfunction combined with a Romulan ship under stress and a damaged cloaking device. Not exactly what happened. Creates the illusion that Ensign Rowe and Geordi are dead, but Geordi doesn't believe it to be so, and he acts accordingly.
God, why don't they just
That's a terrible description on every level, because it wasn't the damaged cloaking device that did it. It was the experimental technology.
But that would be giving too much away. But even that, that would certainly. But they're already giving too much away by saying even that much. It's just
Ensign Rowe and Geordi are dead, but Geordi doesn't think so.
Just
yeah, I'm tempted to go on IMDb to get this fixed, but I'm not going to. I'm going to leave it alone. We got our 1. I'm going out with 1-0 record. So next week, the next phase. Until then, live long.
And we know it's not futile now. Go ahead and resist and prosper.
I should have been thinking. I always have to. Why am I not thinking sooner?
That's why I write it down. I used to try and come up with one, and then I never would. Could.
Yep.
Nothing good.
It's All Been Done presents
Who's Got the Time?